Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We'll learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We'll also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. In this episode, we have got Ben Chan. Ben is the Chief Product and Data Officer at Sportsbet, an online wagering company that brings excitement to life for millions of customers in Australia. At Sportsbet, Ben leads 200 people responsible for product, data, risk, and trading, and his group pioneers in incredible betting experience for millions of customers. This is also a very special episode with a different format. Instead of focusing on understanding how a company uses data to run their business, I actually had the luxury and the honor to get the insight from Ben on some of his career history and how he developed himself to becoming a people leader for the roles such as Chief Operating Officer, Acting CEO, or Chief Product and Data Officer for all of these successful companies. Ben shared with us some of the key skill sets that he had picked up and learned during his career at McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, have allowed him to develop an analytical mind, as well as various other important skill sets such as client engagement, presentation, and leading a team. Although he was being trained as a civil engineer and a mathematician, Ben shared that he came to learn about the importance of the people. As Ben put it so well, the common denominator across all different industry or any industry is actually people. It is the people who make the success of a company, and equally it can be the one that bring a company down. By taking care and support the people around you and empowering them will actually ensure that they are much more involved and they are much more engaged to support the vision that you have for the company or building the organization that you want to build. If you are listening to this podcast as a data scientist or a data engineer or analytic managers, there's one key takeaway that you should have by listening to this podcast. Is about getting started from today and pay more attention with people. By spending enough attention to support and empower the people and take them on the journey, it will inevitably make your life and job easier, as well as developing a career that you would want to have. If you have any question for myself or Ben, feel free to send us a message on LinkedIn or connect with Ben on LinkedIn. If you like more episodes like this, where I deconstruct how the top data analytic leader, a high-performing modern organization, make sure you click the subscribe button on the podcast platform. Your subscription on the podcast will help to make the algorithm to favor the podcast better and show it to much more and wider audiences. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the Analytics Show podcast. Super duper excited to have you here today.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for having me. It's great to be on this little show of yours.
The pleasure is mine. Now, I want to start this a little bit light. And from my research, you are a big fan of martial arts and great Bruce Lee. So from where did you pick up your love for martial arts?
Yeah, well, actually, I started, for whatever reason, when I was very young, like 2 or 3 years old, just started to watch lots of martial arts TV because I was born in Malaysia. And then I still remember there's like photos of me when I was young, trying to do martial arts poses. I was trying to copy Jet Li as Wong Fei Hong. So And then when I moved over here in early primary school, I went to this Chinese school, which was on Sunday, and started to learn martial arts when I was 5 years old onwards, and then have never stopped. And so I just love martial arts. I love all types of martial arts.
Good stuff. And you really frequently mention one of these quotes from Bruce Lee, "Be like water." I heard of it a few times. Share with us, how is this quote significant for you in your life?
Yeah, look, be like water means quite a bit to me. This is from early days when I started to read a few of his teachings. And be like water, whether it's in life or in work, has a couple of meanings for me. One is it's really important that you stay with the principles that you are, right? And so water is made out of 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. And no matter whether it's ice, water, or gas, it is always comprised of H2O. So I see that as like your core values. What do you stand for? How do you want to lead? What do you want to leave as your legacy, right? That's kind of like the core to me as a person. And then, be like water. Bruce Lee would say, be like water, my friend. When water is in a jug, it becomes a jug. When water is in a cup, it becomes the cup. It can flow gently or it can crash. And how I think about that is, it's important to adapt to the environment that you're in, right? Recognize what is important for that situation. And so, as I was going through studies, whether it's undergrad or postgrad or high school, I realized that what it required for me to do well was to be very good at exams, right? And so I actually missed most of my classes because the classes didn't help me become good at my exams, right? Like practicing exams made me good at exams. So I actually missed the vast majority of my classes, especially in university. And I focused mostly on actually teaching. I was a tutor and focused a lot on sports, whether it be martial arts or badminton or basketball. And then came, swap back 2 weeks beforehand. Then I'd be all over the exams, right? And 8 hours a day, I'd just be in my room practicing exams. And that was how I got through university. And then you fast forward and I go, right, one of my goals was to get to Stanford to do an MBA there. Right? My dad had always set that aspiration and goal and kind of given me a lot of advice around that. And so from a very young age, I set that as my goal. And I advised myself, what do I need to get into there? So as I was either in primary school or early high school, I wrote to Stanford and asked, what would it take? Back in the day, this is when you were still writing physical mail, they replied with a package and said, you need to do this, this, and this. And so I set my sights on, right, I need to do A, B, and C as they prescribe, get good grades, get into a work position that demonstrates your leadership, do lots of extracurricular things, and overall, be a very strong community member. And so I did what it took, right? I did all those things and was fortunate enough to be accepted into Stanford for my MBA. And so be like water is my way of thinking of, look, I've got my core values, core principles, core what I stand for, and then I need to adapt to figure out what's the right way to succeed for a goal that I have.
I love it. I can't help but to think also, be like water is almost similar to the agile methodology in a certain way, that we need to be able to adapt what is the current situation, and we need to adapt what the customer is telling us. To some extent, it looks like Bruce Lee already knew about agile in a certain way.
Yeah, he was a very, very agile person.
Now, share with us about your current role and the company that you work for.
Yeah, so I am at Sportsbet, and I'm fortunate enough to hold the role of Chief Product and Data Officer. So I've got about 150, 200 people in my group, and we're responsible for product, data, risk, and trading. So basically, as you come into our website, you'll see whether it's a website or our app, a product experience. And as you go through the journey, you'll go through whether it's sports or racing, and you'll see the different markets and the different odds. My team is responsible for how that flow is, what the numbers are, what do you see first, what do you see second. And so, great company. I love working for Sportsbet. It's this great combination of sports and numbers for me. And, that is a perfect combination. The only thing missing for me is whiskey. If there was whiskey in there, then we're done. So, but I can make up for that in various ways.
Well, I'll send you some really nice whiskey next time I am in Japan. There was this time I was in Hokkaido. I think it was the Nika, the distillery.
Yes.
So good. It's probably
great distillery.
Yeah, so good. And it was only $10 for the tasting. They were so good. So I asked for a picture of the bottle that I actually was tasting. Then I was like, I'm going to try to buy these, right? So I Google and I realized that an actual bottle itself would cost $1,500 USD. No, I have to scrap the brand. So
Japanese whiskey has just taken off like crazy, right? Like, it's gone Bitcoin type crazy. I still, a long time ago, when I was going to, staying at hotels for my work, and in the minibar, there was Johnny Walker Red, Jack Daniels, and Hibiki 7, either Hibiki 12 or Hibiki 17 little bottles, right? And so I would go, great, and I'd take it home, and that was probably 20 whatever years ago. And then fast forward to today, I find this in my mum's pantry, and I'm like, wow, like, this little minibar bottle is actually worth about $100 right here, right? Like, and back then, 20 years ago, it was next to Johnny Walker Red, which is $40 a bottle, right? like a large bottle. So this Japanese whiskey's come a long, long way. So good for them.
Exactly. I think you can find quite a few of them in some of the bottle shop in Melbourne. Probably not so much in Brisbane. Now, I want to bring back to where we are at, and I want to talk a little bit about, because I find that your career are extremely interesting, and I want to get a bit more insight of what you have done. And I think this is probably the journey that many people are interested and wanting to know, and how some of the insight they will be sharing with us today can help us and them to get to the career that they aspire to be, right? And the very first part that I have for you is you had a bachelor degrees in engineering, civil engineering, and then actuarial mathematics from the University of Melbourne, and you graduated with the top of your class in both degrees. Now, I have worked with a lot of actuaries, very, very smart people. At the same time, I'm curious to know, why did you not pursue the path of this highly regarded profession and become an actuary? And it's actually a really well-paid job as well.
Yeah, look, both professions and both courses I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed civil engineering. I loved actuarial mathematics. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. The mathematics was so deep and so sharp that after actuarial mathematics, when I was doing my civil engineering courses, I thought that was really easy because of how hard actuarial mathematics was. And later on, I started to teach actuarial mathematics in my final 2 years. I taught final year actuarial mathematics to the students. And there I learned even more about maths and statistics, because it's only when you teach that you really, really understand. And so I actually did some internships in actuarial mathematics. As I was at AXA as an actuarial intern, and really enjoyed it. It was my first real foray into work life, and I thought I was very fortunate to have a internship from my second year of uni onwards. It was a 5-year double degree, and so I was at AXA for 3 years. And then I found out more and more about other professions, and the hot topic at the time was investment banking. And so I kind of asked, who are the top investment banks around? And a lot of people said Goldman Sachs. So I applied to Goldman and read a bunch of newspapers around the financial markets to actually start to understand it. Went for the interview, and they gave me the internship, summer internship. So it was great. I went to Goldman in Sydney and got exposed to the trading floor. And I loved it. And here I was with this very interesting decision between actuarial mathematics and investment banking. And for me, and this was very much a personal choice, in the world of the actuary, you write your term life insurance or whole of life insurance, and then you start to have an idea of whether you've made money for the company or not, but not really until several years down the track, like 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the track. Whilst on the trading floor, soon as I bought a stock or sold a stock, within seconds, I know whether I've made money or not, right? I know where I've read the market well or not. And for me, that instant gratification was the trump card for me. And so I started to investigate kind of that path a bit more. But that said, I love the grounding that both civil engineering and actuarial mathematics gave me. I would do those over and over again. Hopefully, one day after I retire from work life, I'd love to go back to university.
And think about the actuarial mathematics again.
Yeah, whether to study or whether to teach or both, that would be a wonderful life.
Now, foreign exchange trading is equally a really stressful job as well. What are the important lessons that you pick up during this time at Goldman Sachs that you think may have helped you in your career?
Yeah, so look, I was at Goldman from 2007 to 2010 in New York on Wall Street. And if you remember those years, 2007 is when Bear Stearns went down, 2008 is when Lehman went down. The whole financial crisis is kicked off. And so I was fortunate enough to see that period of time where the volatility was, to that date, unprecedented. And so because the volatility was so high, and back then, if you had a plus or minus 2% jump or fall in the stock market, that was considered a quiet day, right? Whereas on a normal trading day prior to 2007, anything that was 1% or above was like a massive move, right? And so you've gone from that to then 2% is a quiet day. So it was just an eye-opening experience where lots of markets were falling, lots of companies were going bust. And I still remember, day to day, you would have to update on whether your clients were still solvent, right? And so every time a client came in, you'd have to check whether they were solvent or not, right? Before you traded. Because if you traded with an insolvent client, then they don't have to, you're kind of in trouble with the third party risk. So it's just an eye-opening experience. The stress at the time was incredible. I still remember one of my first trades. It was an option trade where I needed to hedge the other way. And I made I basically bought instead of sold, right? I bought about 100 mil Aussie instead of selling 100 mil Aussie. And as soon as I executed the trade, I was like, oh my gosh, I think I've actually gone the other way, right? I should have hedged the other way. Within seconds, I realized, yes, that was incorrect. Reversed my trade. So, I went 100 mil back and then another 100 mil towards the correct way. And in those few seconds, we gained a couple of $100,000 because of that mistake. It was huge, right? A couple of seconds for a mistake. And I was very fortunate that it went my way. But a mistake is a mistake. And gosh, I never made a mistake after that, right? I checked every trade, made sure I was on the correct side and executed. So that was one of my first few trades on the floor, which was just a great starting experience. And then made sure I never did that again on the trading floor. And so, what I take from that is, since my trading days, I've always thought when I'm in a semi-stressful situation, unless I'm losing money by the millions in seconds, it's not actually that stressful. And then, I played this back to my Marine friend, and he's like, Ben, let me give you another angle. Unless you're losing blood by the second, then it's really not that stressful. And so my Marine buddy had been in Afghanistan and different parts of the Middle East, and he gave me a very different perspective when I was telling him this story. So, for me now, unless I'm losing millions of dollars by the second or losing blood by the second, then I'm not that stressed.
I want to put a different perspective, though. I can see where you're coming from, that if we are not losing millions in second, there's nothing to stress about. But equally, sometimes I think the biggest risk and the most challenging one is actually the flop in the hot water, because you don't even know that the danger is boiling. What are the things that you would pick up to say, yes, I'm not losing millions in second, but But equally, this particular situation or maybe this business problem that we are facing is actually boiling the frog in the hot water.
Very good question. My approach to that wouldn't be stress-based though, right? And I think where small changes are actually leading towards a disaster, what that requires is for a person to step back very often and to look at the wider picture, look longer term, think about external trends and not be focused on the here and now as the only thing to be focused on. And so as a practice, I have a recurring email to myself on a frequent basis that says, step back and think about the wider picture. How might we get disrupted? How might our customers move away from us? How can we disrupt the market, right? And asking those questions prevent the situation that you're talking about, Jason. And so I think it's a really good question, and it takes discipline and time away from the tools. And it doesn't have to be a great deal of time, it just requires some quiet time.
I think that is a good tips as well. The email reminder to step away and think about what is potentially that customer moving away. So I like that tips. I should do that for one of my own reminder. Now I want to take back to a little bit part of your career. We talk about the FS, the Wall Street, the excitement of those things. But you spent quite significant time at McKinsey as well. So what are the events that led you to the opportunity of working at McKinsey?
Yeah, so McKinsey was a wonderful experience for me. And how I went to McKinsey was, at the end of my Goldman Sachs internship, the managing director said, Ben, you've got a job here. And before you take it, what do you actually want to do? And I said, well, I really want to go to Stanford and do an MBA. Right. And said, well, you should have a think about McKinsey, right? Because not many people can get into McKinsey, but I think you can. And so I looked into it a bit more and researched what are the pathways, what does McKinsey enable you to do, what do the numbers tell me in terms of getting into a school like Stanford, and realized that a lot of McKinsey people go to Stanford, probably more than Goldman or investment bankers in general. And then secondly, the grounding that McKinsey provides a professional early in their career is quite strong. If I was on the trading floor, I would have learned a lot about trading, financial markets and analysis. At McKinsey, I was very fortunate to be at a place like McKinsey where they gave the opportunity to learn about an even broader range of skills, right? From presentation to analysis to client management to problem solving, and industries from airlines to banking to telco to retail to the military to government in all sorts of regions. So in my first 2 years, I spent the majority of my time outside of Australia. I was in Taiwan for a great deal of time. I was in the UK for a great deal of time, doing all sorts of different industries, right? All the ones that I just mentioned. And that enabled me to have a much wider view than what I might have if I didn't go to McKinsey. So I'm very, very thankful for that experience. And if I had my chance again, I would certainly do it again because of the broad range of experience. It's certainly hard work, very hard work, right? But very worth it in my perspective.
It looks like the Eric Schmidt, the ex-CEO of Google, share the same view, because I think from one of the books that I read, he is actually the one who created this initiative where he talked to the founder of Google and said, we should bring in all of these ex-McKinsey people who have got 1 or 2 years in there, because I think these are the people who can be trained up to become a really good product manager, because like you say, it is a great training ground. And in fact, the current Google CEO, Sundar Pichai, also started his career at McKinsey. So do you feel like, apart from what you have already just described, in your own experience, what are other things that you think those 5 years of experience in McKinsey preparing for the roles that in the later part of your career, especially when you have to lead a really large team in different industries?
Yeah, I think first of all, McKinsey does a couple of things. One is it gives you this broad range of skills that I just talked about earlier. Number two it creates a lot of flexibility and agility in your learning. Because we were going from project to project in, call it 3 to 9 week windows, right? Project would typically, when I was there, last between 3 and 9 weeks. And so I'd finish a airlines project in Sydney after 3 weeks. I'd then go to somewhere in Asia to do a banking project for 6 to 9 weeks. I'd then be in Europe to do a government project on logistics for 6 to 9 weeks. And so the agility of needing to pick things up very quickly, ask very sharp questions, understand, and then provide and add value is a great muscle to develop. And then thirdly, what McKinsey does is it helps other employers by saying, hey, we've put this person through the ringer, right? It is hard work that we have an up or out policy. So if the person doesn't get promoted, they get asked to leave, right? And so if a person's been at McKinsey for more than 2-3 years, they've already kind of proved that they can last there, right? So it's almost like a stamp of approval, and that's very, very helpful. So hopefully that gives you a bit of explanation of kind of what a company like McKinsey can do, which I'm very fortunate to have been part of.
I love the insight of that. Now, let's discuss a bit about Envato. So this is where you spend significant time of your career in various important functions at the company, as well as the chief operating officer and acting CEO to drive the next phase of the growth for the company. Now, I know back at that time, Envato is already a highly successful startup, profitable, based in Melbourne. But still, I think stepping away from leaving the roles and the career, promising career at Wall Street, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, enjoying a startup. Yes, it's profitable, but it's a small company equally, right? And what was your thought process that led you to leave those most successful corporation and join a startup?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So prior to Envato, I was at McKinsey. And as I was in my final couple of years at McKinsey, I was thinking, one thing I would love to do is to be part of a company and to grow that company, right? And to really be embedded in the culture, embedded in how we do things, to build product, to serve our customers and to grow it. And I thought the best way for me to do that is to actually go into a non-professional services company, right? To go into a company in industry. And in my final kind of 12 months at McKinsey, I started to talk with various companies around the place, ranging all the way from large corporates, like Telstra, Qantas, National Australia Bank, all the way to smaller companies, startups, and Envato was one of them. And the reason I chose Envato was I saw great potential in the company. I saw that the growth that they've been on, which was great growth, was through this very, very insightful entrepreneurial streak that the founder, Collis, has. And I thought I could add a lot of value by bringing more commercial nuance and commercial thinking. And so the cross-section of kind of commercial and I love technology meant that it was a really good fit for me. And so I joined after McKinsey and joined when it was under 100 people. And by the time I left, we had grown to 600 people. And it was phenomenal growth. I started to run the company about halfway through my 6-year period there and was fortunate enough to be working with just great people throughout the company. The founder, Collis, was phenomenal, super entrepreneur. I learned so much from him. He's very much a gut and kind of insight, intuitive type person. And my background was very much more analytical. And so I thought our combination was very, very complementary. And I really enjoyed my time there.
I love your thought about growing the company. It's funny, just a bit of a sidetrack. I just make a hire this morning after a few round interview, etc., etc. I asked her, what is one of the reasons that she wanted to join me, especially this is a remote position, as you say, because I think that is an opportunity to grow the company. So I'm hopeful that she is going to turn out as good as you are. And I'll be be super excited.
She sounds better. So that's great.
Now, Envato is a digital marketplace based in Melbourne. Digital marketplace is extremely, extremely difficult. I know how challenging it can be because I've tried before, because you have to build the demand and the supply at the same time, right? So it's a classic chicken and egg question. What do you think are the key lessons that you will share with us in growing a marketplace business that could be useful for us we could learn from?
Yeah. And so look, the marketplaces are very, very interesting beasts. And because you do have the two sides, you need to manage them quite separately. Their needs are very, very different. And so the one thing that we found worked very, very well for us was to ensure you served one side very, very well to kick it off. And if you could serve one side very, very well, then when you open it up to the other side, then a lot of the value is there, right? And so to give a specific tangible example, when we started one of our business units, we made sure the content providers, so the sellers in a two-sided marketplace, were well serviced, right? We made sure they could get their items on to our marketplace well, that we were paying them well, that there were good terms and conditions for them. And so that created a lot of momentum on that sell side. And so once you secure your sell side, when you open it up to your buy side, then the buyer's like, wow, there's great content here. I want to be part of this. Let's do it. They become active customers. That in turn generates profits, more profits for the sellers. And so more and more sellers come on, more and more sellers provide better content, and the wheel is off and running. And so that's kind of one way we approached it, is to make sure that you serve one side very, very well, so then you can attract the second side.
I'm curious to know, though, how do you manage that really early period of getting the sale and getting the supply side of the business to grow? As the supplier, they come into the marketplace, then sometimes it takes a lot of confidence or takes business sales transaction to convince them to say, this is the place to stay, and they will be able to sell their product, whatever product they are selling in the digital marketplace, right? Is it a very challenging period to manage, or is it more of as soon as that whole sell side is built up and when the buyer coming into the picture, people will tend to be able to stick around? Would that be the case?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of different angles. So I think your question centers around how do you even get them to come on your platform, right? If you're a new player, how do you get sellers? So I think there's a couple of different tactics. One is go after some key sellers that are like your marquee people, right? And so if I give an example that a lot of people understand, pretend I had a two-sided marketplace that involved basketball players, right? And basketball players and fans, they're two sides. Now, I could get lots of average basketball players, or if I got the basketball player, right, whether it be Michael Jordan or LeBron James or whoever, I could sign one strong, super strong marquee player, then all the other players will come. They're like, you can go, right, hey, by the way, LeBron James is from me, right? So do you want to come on? And so you've got this bright, shining beacon that brings all the other players or sellers onto it. And so that's one angle. The other angle is you have to remember the place that we were playing in is digital content. And so there's actually very little cost for a seller to provide an item to you, right? Because it's digital. There's no inventory cost. Just because I'm selling with one place doesn't mean I can't sell with another place. The only cost is me uploading my item and whatever bandwidth cost that might cost. So, I'd say that digital is a beautiful place in that you don't need to be exclusive. And even if there were exclusive terms, the barrier is a lot lower.
Share with our listeners some of the tips and insight that you have for building and managing a large analytics team. Then I think this applies to in Envato and also some of the works that you do.
Yeah. So look, I would consider myself in my early stage of my career and just deep down inside a very much a numbers person, right? And so, yeah, I would hope to think that I understand where a lot of my team members are coming from, what they're feeling, their wants and needs. So I apply this as much as I can to how I lead people. And for me, it's making sure that the team understands the vision, they understand the goals, they understand how all our different goals and all our different strategic initiatives lead up to achieving that vision, and then provide very, very clear expectations. And then I try and empower the team to run, right? My job is to help bring that vision, that clarity of strategy, that clarity of expectations to a group of highly talented, motivated individuals, and then enable them to expand as far as they can within their own envelope, and then to coach, to provide guidance as needed, right? And so that's my approach to leading people, whether it's analytics type folks or non-analytical people. I think people work at their best in that sort of environment.
Now, looking back at your career so far, what do you think are the key skill set that you use? Well, apart from the training out that McKinsey provided to you, but what do you think are the key skill set that you use to successfully navigate from one industry to another industry? Because I think so far it has expanded from the professional services, the management consulting, to trading, to running a marketplace, and now in Sportsbet. What are the key skill set that we could learn from?
Well, I think that there's a lot of skills out there. And if I could, the ones that are on top of my mind, first of all, is people and leadership skills, right? And the one common thread across all of the industries and companies I've worked for is people. And if I can develop the skill to lead people to achieve great things, then I feel like that's a big part of the puzzle. And so I think the absolute core thing is people and leadership skills. And it's probably the hardest one for me to master. With numbers, you can be right or wrong. With people, it's a continually evolving beast where people's expectations and our society continually change and continually evolve. And so we should, which means the answers always change. And also, there's so many different types of preferences and people challenges that there's no textbook answer for a lot of the problems that you come across. And so it's a constant learning experience for me, and one that I really love being on, but also one that daunts me. It's on the days that I'm down, most likely I'm down because of people-related issues, right? And also the days that I'm up, it's because of people-related highlights and wins. And so I think that's just absolute number one. Whether you're an analytical person or not, whether you're a data person or not, like I think people and leadership skills are core, absolutely core. So, and then the other thing that comes to mind is thought leadership. How do I bring to bear everything that I've learned, all the insights that I have, into a clear, concise, synthesized, structured manner? And how do I ask the right questions to the right people to help bring that insight to bear? So I think that's a skill that is also just constantly evolving, and one that has to be practiced over and over again in different environments. And I think keeping your brain as a muscle very, very practiced and very, very trained is important.
On the first advice that you give about the people leadership, understanding the people, how would you advise to the analytic professional, people who are more of an analytical mindset, who prefer to deal with the numbers, who prefer to deal with the computer because it's only one or zero, right? It's only one or the other way. But with people, it's entirely different story. I can relate to that so much. How do you think people like us who prefer the black and white, how can we train ourselves or develop ourselves to be more of a people's leader so that it allows them to progress, to build their career, to become a top executive leaders?
Yeah. And look, there's certainly one angle, which is I must be a strong people leader to progress in my career from a management perspective and becoming an executive. But even more important and even more immediate is if I can be a great people leader, and you don't have to have a leadership title to be a leader, right? You don't have to be a manager or a head of. You can be an analyst, a data scientist, it doesn't matter, right? You can be all of that and still be a great people leader. And I think it's really important because even if the numbers are right, even if you've got the best model or the machine learning model or Excel model or best answer, that's half the job done. The other half is to bring the people around you on that journey, right? To convince stakeholders, to persuade people that this is the right way, because our world doesn't always just run on numbers and isn't always just numbers-led rationale. So having people leadership, having the softer skills is important to get your technical answers forward, right? To get your technical answers into production, to get your technical answers implemented. So I see that as a core part of everyone's role. I don't think it's as simple as, well, look, I'm just a scientist, I'm just an analyst. I think it's part of everyone's role.
I think so. And whatever role that we are in, or whatever works that we do, is really about, like you say, bringing people to the journey and then ability to sell. I think to some extent is a bit of the selling and the salesmanship as well, to sell the idea. I feel like to some extent, looking back on my journey, I feel like maybe one thing that I have to change my mindset perhaps is that in analytic, in numbers or in computers, is like, if I fix the problem, it will just happen immediately. I can see the result. Whereas with people, I have to be much, much more patient and I have to bring them the journey, which is why when you say bringing them the journey, it makes it so clear to me. Would you say that is a way to describe it, or from your experience?
Yeah, look, I think it's one thing that drives me a lot in my own personal life is efficiency, right? For whatever reason, I've always tried to be as efficient as possible. And I learned early on that even though it might be quicker for me to write an email to say, here's why we should do this, sometimes it's actually more efficient in the long term to have taken people along on the journey all the way, to have the conversation, to understand their questions. So it's not just dropped. The answer is just not dropped at the end, right? And if you think about total efficiency, you're going to think about the long game. Don't just go, right, this is my answer and that's it. It should be done. Have those interim meetings, have those ongoing milestone meetings to discuss so you evolve the answer with the people. Because the more involved they are, the better the engagement and therefore the faster your answer will be implemented.
I love it. Now, this brings us to almost the end of this podcast interview. I always ask these two questions to every single of my guests. Number one is, what is your most important first principle?
I'm having trouble answering that question because I've got a few principles and it's hard for me to prioritize. So may I give a couple of principles?
Yes, please.
First is take care and support and encourage the people around you. I think I've talked a lot about people leadership and being there for your colleagues, being there for the people in your life, right? Whether work or not, like, or personal, and making sure that you leave a great people legacy is really important to me. And so that's one principle. The second principle is ensuring that I'm always trying to get better and better. I'm trying to always learn more, optimize, be more efficient, think about the bigger picture, right? One of my worst fears is to locally optimize. And in locally optimizing, you sometimes forget to universally optimize. And so, as I mentioned, stepping back, making sure I'm answering the right question, making sure I'm spending the time in the right place is very important. So whether that be learning, reflecting, and just continuously growing. And so that's my second thing. My third thing is then also making an impact. I want to ensure that in whatever I do, in whatever industry I am, and whatever company I'm part of, is to be able to create a positive, long-lasting impact, whether that's people, whether that's product, whether that's analytics, whether that's structures or systems. That's a big driver of mine. So hopefully those three suffice as an answer.
Thank you. What is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
It's a good question because I've actually never read a book.
Oh, right.
I have tried many times and I fall asleep. So I've never read a textbook. I've never read any book. And that's just not the way I consume information or learn or consume knowledge. My preference is to do it in other ways, especially learning by doing. And so if I could apply the same sort of question logic, which is, is there a lesson that you wish you had learned when you were younger? I think it is around this people part, right? Take care of the people, support your people, encourage them, and have that as your primary driver, because everything else will move in the right direction if you focus on the people. I think in my educational background, it was always about the numbers. And so I learned much later on about the people side. And that's the side that I now focus most on and care most about.
I love it. I can share that sentiment. I feel so much exactly about that as well. Now, thank you so much, Ben, again, about sharing all this insight and share with us a bit of your history about getting to where you are at today. I'm really certain and confident that many of the listeners will benefit from this. And really the key takeaway that I really can't help but to emphasize people is it's just so true, because every single thing, I hate to say that, but I even say every single beautiful line of code or crappy line of code that people are creating in building the model or whatever, it still comes from people. So I can serve it.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jason.